Welcome to the Thousandth Lead Extraction Forum, and it's basically the cardiology forum. I would like to thank you all for coming tonight, and just going to keep the door open a bit for latecomers just in case, so I apologize for that. So the event tonight will have Dr. Andy speak for a few minutes, then Dr. Bashir, and then we'll have a grateful patient by the name of Sherry, and then we'll have an open forum where you could ask any questions that you have, okay? So Dr. Andy, the head of our cardiology department, as you can see, has a lot of titles, and so bear with me while I explain Dr. Andy to you. Dr. Igniszewski, my apologies, received his medical training in Poland. He came to Canada in 1983 and completed internal medicine training at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, before moving to the University of Alberta, where he finished his adult cardiology training. He was recruited for medical leadership of Premier Cardiac Rehabilitation and Prevention Program at St. Paul's Hospital, Vancouver in 1994. His other areas of interest include management of severe heart failure and heart transplantation, including novel multidisciplinary approaches to the treatment of disease with specialized clinics and quality improvement measures. Dr. Igniszewski is the director of Heart Function Clinic at St. Paul's Hospital and the former director of the UBC Heart Transplant Program at St. Paul's Hospital. He's also the provincial lead of heart failure. Dr. Igniszewski also has research interests in cardiac rehabilitation and prevention, heart failure, and patient outcomes following various cardiovascular interventions. He has published 77 papers and 128 abstracts in these areas. He is also very involved in the teaching of medical students and medical residents at St. Paul's Hospital. He has received teaching awards from the University of British Columbia, such as Best Teacher during Clinic Rotation, Excellence in Clinical Teaching Skills, and Teacher of the Year awards. He has also received an award for excellence in health promotion from BC Medical Association and Publication Award on Original Research. Welcome, Dr. Andy.
Good evening. I wish my mother was in the audience and could hear. It's been a long time since I heard so many things, good things said about myself. So welcome to this cardiology forum. I'm not a star of this evening. I'm going to go into that in a moment. But perhaps I could tell you a few words about our heart center, Provincial Heart Center, which I have a pleasure of leading. The Heart Center was created about 25 years ago as a final product of putting together all bits and pieces of cardiac care. And in fact, it's the only such center in our province. To be called Heart Center, you need to provide cardiac care in all aspects of the disease, and starting with prevention and rehabilitation through excellent clinical cardiology, acute care cardiology, intensive care, all the way to procedure-based parts of our program, electrophysiology, devices. And in that area, we also partner with our surgical colleagues. We perform over 1,000 open heart procedures per year. This year, bumper year for heart transplants, which Dr. Bashir, who I'll be introducing shortly, also works at about 28 of them, as well as special ventricular assist device, which we're the only program using this technology. We also are quite advanced in innovations. In fact, part of our program is world-renowned. It's led by Dr. John Webb and another surgeon, Dr. Jian Yi, and deals with implantable valves. And just on a side, less than a year ago, we celebrated another milestone, which was 1,000th valve procedure that was performed here at St. Paul's Hospital, the most such procedure anywhere in the world. Because of the focus on innovation, we are also academic institutions where all of us are professors at the University of British Columbia, but we also work in a number of academic centers, including Heart and Lung Center, when we do a number of innovative procedures, both surgically, medically, and in so-called biomarkers, when we can actually diagnose and perhaps treat the disease before it becomes apparent. Welcome, Dr. Sam Lichtenstein, who was the first director of the Heart Center, in fact, the man who created that, as well as UBC head of cardiovascular surgery in our institution, and a man who trained Dr. Bashir. So I think enough about Heart Center. Let's move on to the star of the evening, and this is Dr. Jamil Bashir. It really gives me a great pleasure to talk about this young man. He is a clinical associate professor of surgery at UBC. He's a program director of education. He takes that part of his job very seriously. He's involved in cardiac transplantation and ventricular assist devices as one of the only 2 surgeons in the province who can do that. He's surgical director of lead extraction and devices, and in this capacity, he will address us today with regards to lead extraction. I know he's a pretty modest fellow. He's not going to tell you much about it, but this, by the way, is the most any single center has performed of this procedure has performed in Canada, and with the biggest center for those procedures in Western Canada. So his patients come not only from British Columbia, but from all over Western Canada. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Jamil Bashir to say a few words to us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Igniszewski, and thank you to the Foundation for giving us the chance to talk a little bit. I'm most grateful for Sherry Robinson for coming, and she's going to talk to you after I do, and we're just incredibly pleased to have her here and to have her supporting our program. Sherry was our 1,000th lead extraction, so that was a real milestone for us. Lead extraction is a bit of an esoteric procedure, and so we thought we'd talk a little bit about it and talk a little bit about devices, and I have a bit of a show and tell for you here. And I think feel free to interrupt and ask questions during the talk. There's nothing formal about what we're talking about tonight, and also feel free to come and ask questions afterwards if you've got anything that you'd like to discuss.
Sorry, we're suffering from a little bit of tech.
Yeah, no, you're switching over right now. That's great. So as Dr. Igniszewski said, I'm a cardiac transplant surgeon, but actually about half of what I do is managing people's implantable devices. These devices have become increasingly more sophisticated, and people have become increasingly more reliant upon them. And there's lots of people in the audience who actually have these devices, who know how important they are in their lives, and have become much more reliant on them. But as they've gotten more complicated, we've had to maintain these devices. And what the lead extraction program is really about is about maintenance of these devices. So we're here for the people of British Columbia when they have problems with their devices. I'm kind of the fix-it guy, so they call me, and I usually get called at least 3 or 4 times a week to fix something with somebody's device that's gone awry. And we have just an incredible armamentarium of tools in our toolkit that we can use to fix these devices. And of course, I'll give you a couple examples of that, and I see people in the audience who I know of who've benefited from some of that as well. So not everyone here is very well versed with devices, so I'm going to show you a few things and just to do a little explanation as well. The very first cardiac implantable devices were pacemakers, and they were used for people who had slow heart rhythms. So these are strips on the top there that you can see of people you can see this. This is the electrical activity of the heart, so each time you see a little blip here, that's when the heart's firing off, and you get a little electrical signal from it. And you can see that this person here has a very slow heart rhythm. This one was going along fine, and then all of a sudden, not much. And so that's the last thing you want, of course. Nobody wants to be the flat line, right? So in the 50s, if you had this, after the Second World War, in the 50s, if you had something like this, there was nothing that you could do. You'd basically be lying in bed, and if you were lucky, you at least had a slow heart rhythm. But if you're unlucky, you had a flat line, which we all know what that means. But the people that had just a heart rate of 30 or 25, they would basically not be able to get out of bed. So in a very short period of time, in about 60 years, we've gone from that to some of the technology that I'll show you. But I can tell you that the people who have these kinds of rhythms are incredibly grateful that they have a pacemaker. And so a pacemaker is a device that's used to treat these very slow heart rhythms. And you can see this is just a chest x-ray of someone with a dual chamber pacemaker. So there's two leads, one in the upper chamber and one in the lower chamber. These three guys were the guys that actually essentially started pacing. And two of them are cardiovascular surgeons. So back in the day, this was all started by cardiovascular surgeons, and then a lot of the stuff has moved on to cardiology. The equipment that you see here now, of course, so all this stuff that they're working on is now basically condensed into something this big. So in 60 years, you've gotten to where you've been able to take boxes of equipment and turn it into this. I'll pass this around for you. This is a dummy of just a standard dual chamber pacemaker. But what they did is they basically were able to come up with a machine that delivered a regular amount of current to the heart at a regular rate. And so when that electrical signal hit the heart, it would just make the heart beat. And over time, that has become more and more automated, and it's become more and more sophisticated. But the first ones were actually a wire that just came out of the body. And the first one lasted for 6 hours, and then they had to replace it. And after that, it just became more and more sophisticated over time. I'll pass this around, and at the end, if you want to just drop it off. A lot of you have seen these kinds of things. These guys, of course, are now the godfathers of devices, and all of them are very famous, especially Senning and Crawford. Dr. Lichtenstein will tell you they're the people that we sort of look to who started a lot of this kind of work. So that's the slow stuff, but for that time from the 50s to the 80s, if you had a fast heart rhythm that was really bad, there wasn't anything for you. But what happened in the interim was that there was the development of defibrillators. So there are people who don't just have slow rhythms, they also have these very fast rhythms. And this is an EKG of somebody who's gone into, see if I can get my arrow here. This is somebody who's gone into ventricular fibrillation. You see how ugly and irregular that heart rhythm is. And so if you have that, you basically die. And the only way that you can get back usually from that, if it doesn't revert spontaneously, is to put a tremendous amount of electricity across the chest, a tremendous amount of voltage across the chest, which is we call defibrillation. But until 1980, if you had this kind of thing happen spontaneously, and there are people who have these kinds of rhythms that happen spontaneously, there was nothing you could do. Now we have defibrillators, of course, that can automatically sense if this is happening and then treat it by delivering a voltage across the chest, and then to basically clear that those rhythms. You see this X-ray is just of someone who's got a standard biventricular ICD, which is quite a sophisticated device. And I'm going to show you some of that. But this is the guy that invented the defibrillator, essentially. Now, he's not a surgeon, he's an electrophysiologist. And his deal was that his mentor, who was a guy named Heller, had recurrent attacks of these very fast rhythms. So he was a guy that was productive and whatnot, but once in a while he'd go into this very fast heartbeat and he'd basically faint, and then they'd try to get him back with a thump on the chest, or it would go away on his own. So until 1980, when he was able to come up with a technology that would work to fix this, this guy would have these regular attacks. And in BC now, there's 1,000 people a year who get a defibrillator who have that level of type of disease. The first defibrillators were actually patches that went around the heart because they didn't have sophisticated lead technology for defibrillators. So these patches here, as you see, are actually wrapped around the heart, and they were put in first time by a cardiovascular surgeon who wrapped those around the heart. And then you could sense when the heart was going into this fast heartbeat, and then they would give the heart a zap. Since that time, they've now been turned into wires that go into the heart until a couple of years ago, and now we have these new defibrillators that we'll talk about that are actually totally outside the heart. And this is the sort of the most advanced technology that's out there, and I hope Sherry will be okay with me sharing with you that she's the recipient of one of these new types of defibrillators. So we actually took out her old wires and put a new subcutaneous defibrillator in. So let's move on to lead extraction a little bit. So what happens is these wires are put in your body, and so for a pacemaker, this would be a standard, very thin, sort of normal pacemaker lead, and I'll pass this around. But what happens over time is these things will grow inside your body. So once it's in, if you really only have about a year or two before your body will incorporate around it, grow into it, and it's not, you can't just pull it out after that happens. And that's where lead extraction has really come from. That's where the whole field has come from, because people have reasons why these leads need to come out. So that's a standard pacemaker lead, and this is a defibrillator lead. And you'll see here when you get passed around, you see it, that it actually has these coils that you can run your finger on. Those are the high voltage coils that the shock goes to. So I'll pass those around for you to see. But the whole field of lead extraction was really about when these wires go into your heart, you at some point might need to get those wires out. And this is a patient here who actually, I don't know if you can see, but on both sides has a device on both sides. This is a defibrillator and this is a pacemaker. And it turns out they're both infected and they both need to come out in order for the patient to get better. An infection of one of these devices will never go away unless you remove everything. So you've got to get everything out, and that's where the laser extraction business comes in. So as Dr. Ignaschewski said, we do 70 to 80 lead extractions a year. We're the largest program in Canada. We get patients from all over Western Canada who come to Vancouver for this, and Saskatchewan does not have a lead extraction program, so a lot of them come here. Alberta has 2 lead extraction programs, but they still send patients to us to figure out who are fairly complicated, the sort of most complicated of those patients. On the side here, you get just sort of a graphic illustration of what that looks like. You see the yellow stuff is the fibrous tissue that's holding the lead in, and then the laser is depicted here coming down and removing this lead. And what happens is we fire the laser around this fibrous tissue and it vaporizes it, and then we can pull the lead out. I've got some videos for you. So this is a patient that actually had a dual chamber defibrillator. And you see this is the atrial lead and this is the defibrillator lead. There's some wires here because the patient had heart surgery before. And this is the laser going in. So the laser catheter is here. You see that tip on it, and it's coming in, and then we're going to vaporize. I have a foot pedal, and I can vaporize the tissue as I meet it, and then we control where we get rid of that fibrous tissue. So you can see that working here. So you see there, this stuff is hard, so you're bumping up against it, and we're doing this all remotely through a little incision like this, so it's all done very minimally invasively, but you see the laser's coming up against some fibrous tissue there, and then it manages to move its way through, and there the lead breaks free and we pull the lead out. It's actually a lot of fun. It's kind of like fishing. Sherry doesn't want to hear that, but it is, I used to find it quite nerve-wracking, but I really actually enjoy it a lot now. Dr. Ignaschewski is a big fisherman, so he understands the thrill of this. But the problem with laser extraction is it has a bit of risk because this laser can actually make a hole in your heart when we're putting it in, so it has to be done very carefully. This is that same patient with another lead coming out. So I'll just show you that. But you see there's the laser up at the top here, and the lead's already pulled back, but it's still kind of stuck, so we're going to see it getting pulled out. The commonest reason to pull these things out is for infection. So if you have infection, they absolutely have to come out. But the other reason is that some people have many wires in their heart, and we can't leave them all in there. They're going to fill up the heart. So we'll go in and we'll try to remove stuff, especially if it breaks. We don't want to leave the old stuff behind. So you see there's the laser catching on the tip of that wire, and it's going to come free here. Oh no, we don't see the end of it. I think that's it. So that'll come out, and that's the end of that. So as I said, laser extraction is a very, very critical part for a lot of the people whose lives are being impacted and maintained with these pacemakers or defibrillators, and usually because they've either got fast or slow rhythms. I'll give you a couple examples. I'm going to pass around the laser first. So this is the actual laser catheter that you saw in the video, and so it's a long fiber optic cables that go in here, and the laser light comes out the tip of that, and some people have probably seen some of the photos of that are out there. And this actually plugs into the laser machine itself. I would have loved to bring the laser down, but it's 200 pounds and it's a giant bathtub. So it's a little bit hard to push it around. But we plug this in. You want to pass it around? And what happens is there's a bath of xenon and chloride in there. And when you run electricity through it, it creates a light that burns tissue without creating heat. So the key is because the laser's inside the body, we don't want to create heat inside the body, and so that's where the excimer laser is particularly very useful in that scenario. So it is, the lead extraction program isn't just about that though. It's really about trying to maintain people's devices and their systems. And there's a lot of different tools that we have and a lot of different scenarios that might happen. And so I actually brought forward a case that I thought you might find interesting that we just did. And in fact, it doesn't really involve laser extraction at all. So here's a lady with a couple kids. She's otherwise very vigorous and healthy lady, but she developed sarcoidosis, which is an infiltrative disease of the heart where you get granulomas and scar tissue that infiltrates into the right and the left ventricle. What it particularly can attack is the conduction system, so the electrical system of the heart. And these people often have heart block where the electricity won't go through the heart, or they can have very fast heartbeats. So they almost always need a defibrillator and or a pacemaker. In this case, what happened though was that when the wires went through, because they have to go through a valve, they impinged on that valve and they caused her to have severe leakage of the tricuspid valve. So the valve on the right side that leads to the right ventricle is the tricuspid valve. And in the end, she ended up having severe leakage and got very short of breath. So our program is not just about lead extraction. In her case, we needed to fix the valve and then we needed to give her a device that was going to work for her. So what we did is we actually did open heart surgery on her. We took all of the old wires out that you've seen and then in fact repaired the tricuspid valve so it didn't have any leakage, took the wires away from where they were sitting on the valve. We could actually see where they were scarred down onto the valve tissue. And then I put a pacemaker on the surface of her heart. But she still needed a device that would handle defibrillation and be able to see if she had any fast rhythms and be able to treat that. So we published the first paper on using pacemakers and this new type of defibrillator together. And in fact, we'll now proceed to put another device on top of the pacemaker, which is with this new subcutaneous defibrillator. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. But these new types of defibrillators actually do not sit inside the heart whatsoever. So they can sense what the heart's doing from the surface of the chest, and they just get implanted under the skin, and they don't go inside the heart whatsoever. And the technology is really genuinely quite incredible. So it's called a subcutaneous defibrillator, and we can pair it with a pacemaker. And in this case, and some of you have seen this on the news, this is the high voltage coil that we talked about, but not, instead of going inside the heart, this sits under the skin on the surface of the chest, and then it gets hooked up to the actual defibrillator, which sits on the side here. And the heart is just sandwiched in between, and so this device is able to sense what the heart's doing, and then if you go into a fast rhythm, then it can get you out of it by giving you a shock. So that's some of the newest technology that we have. We started this program at St. Paul's. We've now put 50 of these new types of defibrillators in, which is the most in Canada. You want to pass that around? I don't know if you want to see the lead as well. That's the lead for the subcutaneous defibrillator. So that's just one way that we've dealt with somebody who had a very severe problem that we were able to fix. Another, I thought you would find this interesting. We have so many patients around that actually have these kinds of arrhythmias, but we have one family that we're treating who, in fact, 3 of the members of the family actually have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and have very severe heart disease. And in fact, if you can imagine being a mother who has a son who has a ventricular fibrillation arrest at the age of 10, that's in fact what happened to her son. And then her daughter had the same thing. So she's got 2 kids that have both had sudden death, and then she ends up having to have a defibrillator herself. And she's part of our lead extraction program. We've actually operated on every one of the members of this family. So she has had wires inside her heart before, and she's now going to transition to one of these new subcutaneous defibrillators. And I wouldn't be surprised if, in fact, all of the members of the family will eventually transition to this new type of defibrillator. The advantage being that, again, the wires are not inside the heart at all. It's all on the outside of the chest. Along with that subcutaneous defibrillator system, there is some very new and interesting technology with respect to pacing. The issue with these wires, of course, with them having to be extracted, the companies have thought of novel ways of trying to eliminate having those wires altogether. And so there are new pacemakers, and this is an example of one of them. This is about half the size of a AAA battery, if I can get it up here. And this is the new pacemaker that will be paired with that defibrillator that I'm passing around, the one that doesn't go inside the heart. And that is a little tiny half-size AAA battery that can go inside the right ventricle and deliver pacing to the heart. And what they've done is they've been able to get these two things to talk to each other. So this was the first time this has ever happened. This was done in a sheep in January of 2016. And the first in the world, they were able to actually show that they could get this little miniature pacemaker to talk to this new subcutaneous defibrillator. And then thereby they've eliminated all of the wires in the heart, but they've still been able to deliver both pacing and defibrillation to these patients so that you can get both of them. And this is just showing how the two are able to talk to each other by communicating one to the other. So there's the little capsule pacemaker, no wires, and then the SICD, which just has the wire outside the chest. And the two, this is just proof of the communication between the two. You know, the lead extraction program, I just want to say, is more than just about some of this new technology. It's also about leadership in a couple different areas. And then I'm going to finish up and introduce Sherry. But there's a couple things that we're quite proud of. One is, focused at St. Paul's, we have come up with a strategy to try to improve pacemakers for everyone in the province of British Columbia. So we really felt that if we could standardize some of the procedures, we could improve things for everybody. And in fact, we applied to the Specialist Services Committee, which is a branch of the Ministry of Health, and they've given us
MOP code pink OR, MOP code pink OR.
So we've gotten a grant from them for $1.4 million to try to standardize pacemakers across the province. And in fact, there are 13, including children's, 14 centers that implant pacemakers around the province, and you'd be surprised to hear 4,200 pacemakers go in the province around the year, and it's growing by about 4 or 5%. And the idea is that we're trying to really standardize all of the processes around the implants in all of those different centers so that we can improve outcomes and improve quality for patients. And so that's about 1 year in, and we about 2 weeks ago had 70 people from around the province here, talking about how we could improve pacemaker implants in the province. And then just to finish up, there's a couple other things that the lead extraction program is working on. We're working on some research to try to improve lead extraction and understand the risk. And so we have an international study where we're recruiting 4,000 patients to try to understand what the risk to them with respect to lead extraction is. And then finally, there's some other really exciting ideas that we have about trying to, instead of some of the more expensive technology, try to make these wires such that they won't get stuck inside the body. It isn't something that a lot of the companies are particularly interested in because it maybe not high technology, but one of the biggest problems is if the wires go in, it's just the fact that they're stuck in there. And there are ways to probably prevent or reduce the fact that those leads get adhesed inside the body. And so we have some ideas that we're working on to try to stop we still put the wires in, but stop them from getting adhesed inside. So that's basically the end of what I've got for you. I'm gonna introduce Sherry and make a few comments, and then we're both gonna be here to answer questions for you if you've got any. So let's introduce Sherry. Thank you so much for coming. She's gonna tell you a little bit about her experience, and we're just so grateful to have her here. And okay, you've got wonderful. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Hi there. It's good to see everybody. So I'm Sherry Robinson. I am the 1,000th lead extraction done here at St. Paul's, and I consider myself extremely lucky to be here.
You better speak up, though.
Am I a little quiet? Let me pull this a little closer. Is that a little better?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll start with my story of how I became a patient of St. Paul's. I was 10 years old when I had my first fainting spell. I call them pass-outs, and it's basically a near cardiac arrest where I go into strange arrhythmias like Dr. Bashir explained about tachycardias and bradycardias and all other kind of strange ones too. So when I was 10 years old, I had my first episode, and that was the beginning of many throughout my lifetime. It continued through my teens. I was 14 when I was running through thigh-deep water in the ocean and I drowned. My girlfriend had just taken her lifeguarding course and pulled me free of the water and resuscitated me. Excuse me. These pass-outs continued throughout my entire lifetime. In my teens, they were getting worse and worse throughout. But we couldn't figure out what was going on. I was having pass-outs, end up in hospital. By the time I got to hospital, my heart was back to normal. Everything was functioning as it should be, so there was no real diagnosis as to what was going on.
I think that's going to go on for a while.
Is it going to go for a bit?
Just keep going.
So I was a pretty active teenager still, even between these pass-outs that would happen. I would have great days and no pass-outs that would be for months and months, and then all of a sudden I'd have another one. I'd end up in hospital, and again, everything was looking normal for my heart again, so there was no explanation as to what was happening. Into my 20s, I was continually trying to have an active lifestyle, but my pass-outs were getting worse. I started having children, so at this time, I kind of curbed my activities to keep things safe for my children. I didn't want to pass out while I was out for a walk with my child in a stroller. And if I did go for a walk, I generally attached a dog leash to the stroller to myself, just in case. So I kind of functioned within this dysfunctional life for the next few years.
You thought it was hard enough to speak in front of a group of people, then you have to have your arms going on.
Providence.
That's
level
easier, it
2,
gives me a
Charlie
break.
Delta. Code red, Providence level 2, Charlie Delta.
So like I was saying, after I had my kids, I curbed my lifestyle somewhat to avoid pass-outs. Towards the end of my 20s, I was having more and more no matter what I was doing, and these were lasting for longer periods of time. By the time I hit 31, I had had a very severe pass-out while I was dancing to AC/DC at my aunt's house. I lasted about 20 seconds on the dance floor before I passed out. My husband was there and he attempted to find a pulse and he could not. I had a friend who was a first responder. He was there as well and he attempted to find a pulse and he could not. They prepped me to start CPR when I started to breathe again. My heart started, they found a pulse, I was breathing, I was back to normal. Past that point, things were very difficult. I got to the point where I wasn't working. I was cautious walking up the stairs in my house on bad days. I stopped laughing really hard because I was afraid I'd go into an arrhythmia. So I really had to temper my lifestyle along with my personality just to get through. 2005, when I had just turned 32, my husband and I had been fighting for me to see different doctors and try and get things diagnosed and what was happening. We eventually convinced a cardiologist from a different area to do a modified stress test with me. So I would go to his office, I would get him to ramp up the stress test, and I'm going to jump on and start running. And he didn't really like that idea, but we went for it anyways. Before going into his office, I'd had the conversation with my husband where things had progressed really far and I didn't think I would be surviving my next pass out. We'd had that conversation. I'd written letters to my children. It's a really difficult decision to go ahead with this test. So we started that day, and before I went to do my run, I again said to my husband, "It's not a good day. It's going to happen. Be prepared." Sorry. So I did. I got on the treadmill, and I lasted about 29 seconds. It seems to be the number for me. And I started into feeling like I was going to pass out, and I said, "It's happening." I like this, it gives me a second.
No, it's just syncing with what you're, it's like, this is what your
Code
life
yellow,
has been like.
Providence, 10
Yeah.
Charlie. Code yellow, Providence, 10 Charlie.
So I passed out on the treadmill. My husband and the doctor caught me and put me on the floor. They could see at this time what was happening with my heart because I was hooked up to an ECG machine. They could tell that I was in all sorts of different arrhythmias. And eventually I flatlined within those first few moments. The doctor attempted to do a chest thump because of the defibrillator machine was not quite fired up yet enough. He chest thumped me, no response. The defibrillator was ready to fire. He shocked me one time, and again, there was no response. He had asked my husband in the midst of this, "Is this what happens to your wife?" And my husband's like, "Yep, this is what happens. We don't know how long she's got." And the doctor went ahead and shocked me another time, and still no response. And he said to my husband, "I don't think she's coming back." And then about 10 seconds after he said that, my heart started to beat again. And I was revived. I survived. So at this point, they transferred me to St. Paul's Hospital. Boy, was I ever thankful. I first came and I met Dr. Young, who was an electrophysiologist here at St. Paul's. And him and his team came and introduced themselves to me. And they kind of came around and poked me and said, "Wow, you made it, you're here." After seeing what had happened with my heart and my pass out and my cardiac arrest, and for me to be there was pretty amazing that I'd made it. Dr. Young and his team determined that I had a genetic heart condition, which we now know is catecholaminergic polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. It's quite a mouthful. I'll call it CPVT for short. It's part of a sudden arrhythmic death syndrome, and I've had this since I was born, but my symptoms didn't start until I was 10 years old. We now know that 7 of my family members, close and extended, have this as well. But my time in the hospital, we decided that I wouldn't be able to leave without some sort of safety measure, and this is where it was decided to give me an ICD. So I was implanted with the ICD pacemaker and sent on my way to start my life anew at home, and I did. I was back to a semi-normal life. I had a lot of limitations, and I think maybe most of them were probably self-imposed because I was afraid of what was going to happen. Through to 2007, I gradually got more used to my defibrillator and began doing more and more things all the time. 2007, I experienced a lead fracture, which is where my lead began to break, and so my defibrillator was reading that wire as saying my heart was in an arrhythmia and it needed to shock me, so it did. So I received a total of 18 shocks before I was able to get to St. Paul's, where they were able to shut it down. So those shocks, as you can imagine, the first shock, I was laying in bed about 11 o'clock at night, I was relaxing, watching television, and all of a sudden I had this incredible shock, and I was thrown forward in bed, and I could just see a bit of a white light for a couple of moments, and I thought, have I been hit by lightning? It took me a moment to realize it was my defibrillator, because I had felt fine. I didn't know why my defibrillator would be going off. This is when I made my way to hospital. And throughout that period of time of hospital and getting transferred to St. Paul's and searching for a magnet to shut it down once my local hospital realized my defibrillator was malfunctioning. Came to St. Paul's. Throughout the 18 shocks, I was quite relieved to be back at what I would call my safe place, St. Paul's. I can come here and I know that I'm going to find a Mr. Fix-It guy to fix me. So we had, my lead was extracted at that time through St. Paul's Heart Center, and I was reimplanted with a new lead, and everything was back to normal, and I was able to go home and start living my life again. Later on in 2007, we learned that that lead that was implanted was actually recalled. It was faulty. There was a possible potential of a lead breakage again. So knowing that was there, it was decided that we would still keep the lead inside. The doctors at St. Paul's readjusted the parameters on my defibrillator so it would be able to pick up a lead breakage sooner, that hopefully it would be able to warn me and I'd be able to get to hospital and shut it down before anything were to go wrong. So I did. I went for 4 years with that lead inside. I did carry a magnet with me just in case I needed to shut it down. I pretty much had one at work, in my truck, at home, and everybody I knew what to do with it, especially if they heard me scream in agony or swear, which I tended to do. So in 2011, my defibrillator battery was becoming low, so it was time to come in and have it changed. And at this time is when I met Dr. Bashir, and he had decided that now's the time we have to do an extraction. We have to get that lead out of there and get me a new lead, make me safe again. So we did that successfully, thank goodness. And I was given both a defibrillator and a new lead, and I started a new medication called flecainide, which has been quite a life changer for me as well. It stabilized my heart, along with my pacemaker, stabilized my heart, and my defibrillator being my safety backup was there for me. So it was at this point I really began to lead my life to the fullest. I should probably show you a couple of pictures that I skipped over already. This is my hospital visit, my latest one. My friend bought me a shirt. It's an Iron Man shirt, which has got a lit up light that shows this, this incredible heart. So I, after 2011 and getting my new defibrillator, I decided I'm gonna go all out. So I went to Whistler and I participated in the Mottarella, which is a pretty intense sporting event. And then I was also playing baseball. I began back at baseball, and instead of just hitting the ball and walking to first, I actually ran, and I raced my way around those bases every time I was up there. I began soccer as well, because I thought baseball and Mottarella weren't quite enough, so I really got to prove this defibrillator. So I started soccer, and I've been playing soccer since 2012. And up until this year, and just recently in July, my lead in my new defibrillator needed to be replaced because there was a beginning of a fracture. So again, I came back to St. Paul's, came to the Fix-It man, had the surgery, he explanted me with the laser, and I was the 1,000th patient. I'm very lucky to be that 1,000th patient. And that happened on August 24th of this year. And as of this past Sunday, I'm back playing soccer again. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm hoping that any and all support you can give to St. Paul's, whether it's in the way of volunteering or coming to tell your story like I am today, or financially, means a world of difference to patients like me. Thank you.
So I have to say I've been involved in a couple of these things, but Sherry, you hit that one out of the park. That was just incredible. Good for you. I mean, it's your story, but it is, and this is what people go through, and we're very grateful for you and to be able to do the work that we do, and so grateful that you could come and share this. But it's not a small thing to come with the fire alarm going off and telling your story. Incredible. It's great. So now's a really great time for people if you've got questions for Sherry or for myself. Anybody? Please. The fibrous tissue can grow in any place, usually where the lead contacts with the blood vessel or with the heart. It can get extremely tough, and it can even get calcified where it's just hard as a rock. So the laser comes along to where the area is fibrosis is, and we fire the laser when we feel like we can't progress any further, and then we can vaporize it and progress further, and then pull everything out.
Can you see this ahead of time by X-ray?
No, you can't. No, and that's the interesting thing about it, is that you really can't. You can't predict how bad. Like when I talk to Sherry, I don't know how bad the fibrous tissue is going to be until we get in there. And some people have very little, and some people have a tremendous amount. We have a bunch of different tools that we can use to get through some of this stuff. In fact, if we have calcium, we actually have another different tool that actually just kind of grinds it up that we can use as we go along as well, not just the laser, but essentially just come across wherever it's bound, and then we remove it. You can imagine something like her, because the defibrillators are quite sensitive. As you can see, in a young person, they fail much more than we'd like them to, especially the older type. That if we kept putting a wire in every time something happened, you'd end up having 4 or 5 wires in by the time you're 40, and we just can't have that many wires in the heart. So we've got to take them out in order to move forward with that.
Sorry, may I interrupt for just a second?
Yeah.
How's it fasten the chest?
We just use a couple sutures to keep it there. And of course, the scar tissue, once you do the surgery, scar tissue kind of develops around it and holds it in place. But it is a huge paradigm shift from the old stuff because everything else before was sitting inside the heart. So now if we need to maintain it, it's all on the surface. It's very easy to get at, and nothing can go wrong when you put it in. Really, it's much harder.
Going to the heart, though?
No, there's no lead inside the heart. It's all on the surface of the muscles of the chest. It's under the skin, but it's nothing inside the heart.
So a remote type of action?
Well, it actually has a little, if you see the lead, it actually has little electrodes on there. It can still see what the heart's activity does, just like an EKG does. When you put EKG stickers on your heart, you're seeing what the heart's activity is from the outside. It's doing the same thing. But the level of computer technology that allows that to happen and for it to not fail is what's sort of the big advance. Because you can't have it giving you 28 shocks, and if it's not sensing things properly, it would be potential for that. So the key is it can, with a great amount of fidelity, be able to see what the heart's doing from the surface, not from the inside, which that's the big difference. Please.
How you insert the device from the pacemaker? How you start?
Yeah, so you're talking about the older transvenous devices, the ones that go in the vein into the heart?
Just laser device.
Oh, how do we, yeah. So the wires are going in through a blood vessel, the vein here. And so what we do is we cut that wire off once we expose it. And then we have special locking devices that go down it. And then the laser runs over top of that. And we just basically get a start right when where the wire enters into the tissue, and we start burning there. And that allows us to get into the blood vessel and then go down into the heart. Yes, please.
Are we looking at pacemakers in the near future that's outside the heart, or is it already there?
Well, the one I was showing you is actually a little tiny capsule that's still inside the heart, but it doesn't have any wires. And the question is whether that's beneficial. The truth is we really don't know if it actually, because these are all very, very new, we don't know if it's the way of the future or not. We're going to be the first in Canada to implant this new pacemaker in conjunction with the new type of defibrillator. But we still don't really know for sure how that's going to look for people 10 or 20 years down the road. We need to do more of them and understand it better in order to see how it's really going to work. But we don't know.
The capsule is still inside the heart, not outside.
That's right. In that case, for the new pacemaker I was showing you, that's actually inside the heart still. Yeah.
The defibrillators are now outside.
Some of the new types, so don't forget, there's still lots of people that have the standard kind. Not everybody can have the new kind. But these new types of defibrillators that I'm showing you are actually outside the heart. There's nothing inside the heart.
So going back to the people having having extracted it, is there not a limit to how many times you could do that?
I think the most anybody's had it done is probably 4 times. But I don't think there's any real limit. We just hope that we don't have to do it very often.
Scarring doesn't come in the way.
Well, there's definitely an amount of scar that gets built up over time, but we hope that it's not an appreciable amount. Fortunately, things change and move over time, and we have been able to, for example, transition to new technologies or do different things. So we don't always have to do that.
Months to see
In Sherry's case, I think that it was just that nobody could catch what actually had happened when it happened. Yeah, it was, these things it's not like in the old days, like Holter monitors and things like that are quite commonplace now. But even 5 years ago, it was much less likely to be able to catch it. And the problem was they couldn't catch what was happening.
And I did try a whole monitor.
Sherry's husband is at the back too, but you can come on up and you can.
At one point, I did try a Holter monitor, but it happened to be a good time for me, I guess. I wasn't having any heart issues at the moment, and then I did go out and play baseball one time with my Holter monitor on, hoping that it would show something. And it happened to be that because I was jostling so much, it didn't read it. So.
Did you have a comment?
A lot of it to begin with, because of her, who she is and how her age, had to do a lot of it with the trust from physicians.
Can I ask you to come down?
No.
You can ask, but of course.
I'll do it now.
And introduce yourself.
I'm her husband. A lot of it had to do with the trust of physicians and her explaining the story. And her story is, for the most part, I just go out and I pass out and I do this and I get back up, and it's pretty unbelievable for a physician to actually go. So getting somebody to believe and trust her to begin with and saying, this is really what's happening, was a real leap. And I guess that's where, you know, I can't put emphasis on St. Paul's and the amount of time that the doctors here, John and Jamil, in relation to not treating you any different than what you would expect your friend to be. They took the time, they sat down, they talked to you, they explained things, they actually listened to what was happening, and then basically said, okay, and then we'll go to this, and we'll take it in this direction of things. So the steps to getting here were incredibly difficult in getting a physician to actually trust her and what she's saying.
How much of that was a doctor listening to the patient? Are you saying that before 2005, you were having difficulty having a doctor who would listen?
Absolutely.
Can you repeat that back to the
Having a doctor and a physician actually listen to her and believe and trust what she was saying was absolutely the most difficult thing. The doctor that listened to her was Ariana Kaligi, and she stood her ground and said, I trust what she's saying. But then getting, I can't talk about the cardiologist because I would just say bad things. But anyway, eventually this happening in the office, he was like mortified. He couldn't believe what just happened before him. So again, what she has is incredibly rare. It comes to global scale of things, but then having it happen and then getting here, that was the blessing of things. Like the professionals here, the amount of time that they take for the patient, the amount of time that they're willing to expend and just be your doctor is truly incredible. I can't say enough about them. Like, I really can't.
There was two questions.
You want to get away, but you can't.
Yes, how often, people would get lead infection after pacemakers?
Well, fortunately, it's not that common. I think we just looked at the provincial data, and it's about 0.8% of all the device implants. So it's not very common. In some of the series of more sophisticated devices, the numbers are higher, but it's not as common as you think. But I still have to do about 40 extractions for infection a year. So there's still 40 people that have, and once the infection gets on that plastic and that metal, you cannot get rid of it unless you get everything out. So we've got to get it all out, right? And that's because we're putting so many devices in. So if we put in 4,500 pacemakers and 1,000 defibrillators, you're going to have people that end up getting some degree of infection, even if everything goes, just the way it's supposed to. It's gonna happen. So and with the fact that we're still using devices with wires, we're going to be doing extraction for many years down the road as well.
So I have a defibrillator, and I've had it since year 2000. I've never, like you say, you can't check leads ahead of time or viewing methods or. I haven't had any problem with it.
Yeah, so well, and I wouldn't say you're very lucky. I mean, certainly the majority of people do fine with it. I mean, Sherry certainly had a lot of trouble with hers over the years, but and there's a certain proportion that have that. The best way to make sure that it's okay is to just get it checked regularly. So if with defibrillators, most people come every 6 months to get Yeah, but that's the best way to know if the wires are okay and how things are going with the device, is just to get it checked.
How do you know that still?
Well, we measure certain things on the leads that tell us how it's doing. But no lead or device lasts forever, right? So eventually so I'll give you my business card. But anyway, I'm here for you if you need me.
Appreciate it.
Wires, real size that put into our heart?
Yeah, those wires that we pass around are what are real, yeah.
All clear. Code red, all clear.
Just as we're finished, the code red will be clear. It's like the clouds clearing and yeah.
Other question?
Log on the floor here. How are the wires actually attached onto the heart? Is that a?
They have a little screw. I can show you if you come up after that. I think I have a thing to show you. They have a little tiny. Most of them have a little screw on the end, just a tiny little screw that comes out the end. There are leads that just have little plastic fins, but there's a screw that just screws them in. Pretty simple, actually, if you think about it. No, I think it's, so if you've only got 2 wires in your heart, most of us would put a 3rd wire in. So say if one of your wires broke, I'd probably happily put a 3rd wire in without feeling like I had to take things out. But that's for a pacemaker. So for a defibrillator, it's a little bit different because they're more sophisticated and we don't want the leads rubbing up against each other. But, every patient is unique. Every person is an individual, and that's the way we look at you. And we'd look at your situation individually and decide. And it isn't, it's not black and white. It really is very individual. Your leads have lasted a long time, which is great and more typical for a pacemaker than a defibrillator. Defibrillators are much more sensitive. But we have people who have pacemaker leads that are 40 years old and they're still working. It's just that some of them don't always. So we don't want you to expect that they're going to break, but of course, eventually most things do break over time. But it's great that they've lasted as long as they have. Dr. Lichtenstein is my mentor, and he taught me a lot of things, and he and I are working on some new stuff. But I actually think, I'm not sure that the really expensive high technology is necessarily the way that things are going to go with everybody. I think that's great, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to afford it as a society for everyone. And I think that there are simpler ways to solve some of these problems with making the leads easier to remove. So you can imagine if the lead didn't stick inside, and every time it failed, you just pulled it out, with minimal amount of work, that would probably be pretty beneficial. We're not there yet, but we're working on some of these things. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to do. I mean, there obviously is great, exciting technology a lot of it is computer driven coming down the pipe, but it's expensive, and it's expensive for society in general, with the healthcare bills going up and a lot of people getting older. It's hard to be able to afford this technology for everybody. So I think that we need to kind of go low tech and high tech with some of this stuff as we go forward. Great. Well, thank you everyone for coming, especially Sherry. It was an amazing story. That was really, really great.
Yeah, we have a thank you for Sherry.
Thank you.
Can we have another round of applause?
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming. There's still refreshments outside. We will have the show and tell table for you to come and see. You'll have questions with Dr. Bashir, one-on-one time, also with Sherry, hopefully, and her husband. Sure. All right, there you go. They just agreed. My name is Natalina. I'm the one who sends you all the emails. Hopefully tonight we will have an appropriate recording of the evening that I could share an email with you. The alarm might have ruined the recording. And thank you to Dawn, who I've been texting back and forth with everything, so who does our media services. But you will be receiving an email from me in the next few days with the recording if it worked. If it did not, I will send you an apology. Okay, thank you all so much for coming.